which bike should you buy? A Yamaha Super Tenere like this, or a Fjr1300? You know, I'll try to be neutral, but for me, for my riding style, this bike is just so much better. It's so much easier to ride too than, oh, look at that gravel, than the FJR. The FJR was just so bulbous, and it had a lot more power than this, but I don't think it handles as good as this. And the thing is, I think you can watch this and go like, oh, the FJR, man, you just don't know how to ride the FJR. That's a common thing I hear. This is a great little road. I haven't been here in ages. It's dirty though, but this bike doesn't mind getting dirty. It's beautiful. Like, this is Maryland. Plenty of great roads everywhere around here. And you know, that's the beauty of this bike, is that I can ride on these roads to Copper Mile and Bessie, Clemson. Like, the interesting thing, you see these roads, these are better for the Fjr1300. These are better for this because they're rougher. And I tend to stick to these roads because I kind of feel like I'm exploring a little bit more. But the interesting thing with the FJR is that this bike is actually just as stable on these roads as it is on the other more manicured roads. And I think that's why I often say that a adventure bike, I'm just going to use the Super Tenere as an example, is a better sport touring bike than any sport touring bike. The FJR, look, people are very, almost like cult-like lovers of the FJR, and I liked my FJR, and it was a great bike. It was the first gen, but it was heavy, and that's the thing. Yamaha, for some reason, made that bike feel so heavy. Like, the feeling of having a heavy bike on that thing is just incredible. This bike is heavy, and I'm not going to lie to you, it feels much lighter than the FJR. And I think a lot of it has to do with the handlebars. I think a lot of it has to do that it's like the weight somehow just it's so much easier to even move in a garage. I did a video, and I thought it was actually a very positive video of the Fjr1300, and the comments I usually got were, oh, you need to grow a pair, it's light, it's like, it's heavy, maybe you should be riding a moped. And this is kind of like a typical thing. People get very upset whenever you criticize their bikes, but I kind of feel the FJR didn't do well, and I don't know what the sales figures are of the FJR. It's still a bike that's very well sought after for people who really like the sport touring segment. But look, the sport touring segment is mostly dead. It's being usurped by the adventure market. You know, a lot of the guys that ride GS's, at one point they used to be the sport touring guys, but not anymore. And the reason is that these bikes, these adventure bikes, make better sport touring bikes than a sport touring bike. It really does. The GS, the Super Tenere, of course the Super Tenere and the Yamaha FJR are the same brand. I think if you want to ride really fast, the FJR is much better. But the reality is that most people ride bikes at about the same pace. Like, there's nobody really like going balls out all the time on an FJR or Super Tenere. Because when you ride with groups, you're actually, there's a penalty that you pay for riding a big bike. Oh yeah, this is a cool road. I like this a lot. Even that way is really good. There's a penalty that you pay because bigger bikes generally are harder in corners. So even a 600 does extremely well. But the beauty of the Super Tenere is that you don't have to worry about, oh, am I going to run into a gravel road or a rough road, PR road. Never been on this. You see this? This gravel road, on an FJR, you might not want to get your bike scratched. But on the Super Tenere, you know, a little scratching here and there, that's actually a benefit. And how many times have you ridden with guys that had sport bikes and they just kind of refuse to go on these roads? You know, like, what I like about these bikes is that you can just keep exploring. And by the way, this bike on this, so comfortable. There's like nothing really, especially if you combine it with like very good tires. It's like you don't need anything else. It is just such a good, solid platform. Of course, the new Super Teneres, they do have, look at this old abandoned house. It's kind of neat. Look at that. And this kind of like imperfect asphalt. Oh yeah, this bike is perfect for it. And this one doesn't have that much stuff with the electronics, but it's got enough. The FJR though, that's a rocket ship. You know, when you get on it, those 4 cylinders, man, that bike just sounds mean, you know. And if you can combine it with like a really nice exhaust, it's going to sound amazing. You know, I've always been more interested in the big trailies. And I think the big trailies are, man, this is awesome. This is a badass place here. I have never been here. This is really cool. And Frederick County. This is pretty darn cool. See, that is another beauty of the Super Tenere. I would never find this place if I was just riding around on my FJR or R1 or whatever. Like, I've ridden gravel roads, but you know, this thing is like a tank. It just doesn't require much from you. I don't know where I want to go. You know, I think I'm going to go to the right. And I don't have to worry about coming into gravel. I kind of welcome gravel. That's the thing. On the FJR, gravel is kind of a hassle. You can do it, but it doesn't feel like you should be doing it. It's never stopped me in the past, but I kind of just feel that I would rather just stick to like very perfect asphalt on the FJR. This type of road is where the FJR would do really well. These very well manicured roads, and there's a lot of people that really enjoy these, and I do. But that's the benefit of these bikes. Oh, watch out for the grass clippings right there. Don't fall on those. I think when it comes to picking the right bike, you really have to try those bikes out. I never found the sport bike position to be super comfortable, but when you're riding aggressively and you're going around corners, they are much more stable. And the Fjr1300, even though it's not a sport bike like position, it's a very upright, very comfortable position. It feels very stable. It feels very stable on sweepers. This bike, it's stable on sweepers, but only like below, I think, 100 miles an hour. If you have to do any sort of high-speed sweepers, this is not the bike for it. But then again, I don't know many riders that are doing high-speed sweepers all the time. This will keep up with a sport bike. It will keep up with the FJR. And with the addition of greater comfort, mainly because of the long travel suspension. And because it's just kind of like a tank, doesn't require anything. The FJR though, looks good. You know, I do love the way the FJR looks. It's got the saddlebag, so within that you can already start touring. You know, I do find that the Fjr1300 sounds better than this. You know, I wouldn't kick the sound of this bike out of bed. I think the major difference is the smoothness of the motor of the FJR. If you want like a very smooth engine, the FJR, you cannot beat those 4 cylinders. It really is kind of like ultra smooth. and it sounds mean, you know, like when you start that thing, it's like, oh man, that sounds powerful. This one doesn't sound like that. This one doesn't sound like it's like this major fire-breathing monster. It's very docile, especially like at very slow speeds. But the FJR, if you open it up, whatever speed that you want to go, you're there. It really is like a bike that can do like 100 miles an hour in sheer comfort. And of course you do have 17-inch wheels on the FJR. This is a potpourri of tire choices, 19 front, 17 rear. But I kind of find that's way more stable for general riding. You could go with a 21-inch front wheel, especially if you like adventure bikes with a little bit more off-road capability. But I find that like the 19 front and 17 rear is almost like a perfect size for riding. And I guess if you're really into riding off-road, maybe get an Africa Twin or a KTM Adventure. Some days I kind of just feel like I want to explore roads, and I don't really have a plan per se. I do like to spin my tires a little bit, but I love that on these adventure bikes you can just pretty much go anywhere, and the world is a little bit more open. And when you live in the area that I live in, it's like it's hard to get away from people. You know, we're surrounded by everybody like complaining about social issues, and you know, you commute to DC for work, and there's all of these office politics and then politics. When you ride a motorcycle, all of that is gone. And then with the addition to that, if you ride an adventure bike, you can really kind of stop in the middle of the road like this on a gravel road and just kind of look around. And it's kind of cool seeing this. I don't think you get that feeling of freedom from a sport touring machine as much as you would get in a adventure bike. I know that you don't need an adventure bike, but adventure bikes are brilliant. They're really fascinating, and these top of the line open class adventure bikes like the Super Tenere just make a lot of sense for real world riders. Oh, there we go. You know, there's such a thing as real world riding, and not a lot of people talk about that, because when you buy a bike, you buy it because there is this marketing behind it, and the marketing has been strong with adventure bikes, but for a reason. The image of going anywhere is something that everybody strives for in motorcycling. That is the thing that gets people. It's like, oh, I gotta get out, especially now with COVID and people just being ultra upset over everything. People want to get out. People want to like see things, and this, I think, is the best way to have a bike. If you ride a lot, if you put hundreds of thousands of miles on bikes, the adventure and even the sport touring segment is great for you. But I would recommend a shaft drive, and I think that's why I like the FJR too. But I kind of feel, and I think I was very harshly criticized for saying that the Fjr1300 is a better bike than the FJR, and the SD is heavier, but it doesn't feel heavier because of the way they have the engine, the way they have the gas tank. What I don't like about the FJR is that it's extremely heavy. Even this thing is heavy, but the feeling of heaviness is really apparent on that bike. The gas tank, it's what, 7 gallons, and it's really high up, and the battery is also high up. Like everything about that bike, it's so high up. The weight is just, it could have been much lower. Like if you build a bike like that, you need to take it from Honda. I think I'm gonna go this way. You need to take it from Honda and maybe build 2 gas tanks, you know, like a trickle down sort of gas tank. On the SD1300, the gas tank is below. You can fill it up top, but it's a smaller gas tank here, and what that means, even though it's heavy, the weight feels lower, and that is important when you're riding a very big bike. But one of the bigger benefits of the Fjr is it is cheaper, because everybody is going into the hot market of the adventure bike. Adventure bikes tend to be more expensive, but the sport touring machines, you can get them really cheap. You can pick up a older gen Fjr for about what, $2,000 to $3,000. This one is $5,000 to $6,000. So you can see that when you look for budget conscious riders, your bang for the buck on the Fjr is incredibly high. Yeah, budget wise, the bang for the buck on the Fjr, especially the early gens, and you're talking about what, 2004, 2005 are the early gens, you could pick those up for $2,000 to $3,000. And this bike is the early gen of the Super Tenere, and you're talking about $5,000 to $6,000. So that's a big difference. And I think if you get any of those Fjrs, they are bulletproof. You know, I hate to say that because everybody likes to think everything is bulletproof, but yeah, like they're and those bikes, man, I've seen them with like hundreds of thousands of miles, and the 4-cylinder is incredibly durable. But here's another thing about the Fjr: 4 cylinders, much more maintenance. The 2 cylinders this has, it's a lot of maintenance if you have to adjust valves. But can you imagine the 4-cylinder the Fjr's got? Now, lucky for you, both these Yamahas are so maintenance free that you're not going to need much. But imagine if you had like a BMW and you needed maintenance, you'd have to take it to the shop. It would cost you a whole lot more money, and I think that's why you want to go Honda or Yamaha. Yamaha is better than Honda, but it's all a matter of like opinion. Now, as a commuter, since I do a lot of commuting, and that's how I really got into bikes, was for commuting, there are cons of these two bikes. They're just heavy, and if you're in the DC area or any major city, it's a big bike to do, you know, everyday type of riding and bumper to bumper sort of stuff. And both of these bikes are so wide that it's always a little bit tiresome to ride a bike that's so big through bumper to bumper traffic. I've done it before many times, but there are better commuters out there. But the big benefit, of course, of both of these bikes is the shaft drive. Another really important thing behind the Tenere and the Fjr is that the Super Tenere doesn't have all of this plastic to deal with, and plastic looks good, you know, when you keep it nice and shiny and all of that. But if you're riding every single day, it's going to get dirty. And I kind of like the idea of looking at the engine in motorcycles, and there are makers that make their engines to look almost like art pieces, like Ducati's engines look beautiful, and even their frames look beautiful. But I just love the idea of looking at the engine as opposed to a sheet of plastic. And the Fjr is just like a big sheet of plastic. I hate having to remove plastic in a bike. And when you first start out, yeah, you get a sport bike, it's shiny, it's cute, and then you remove things and plastic becomes brittle and tabs break and you drop it. Oh, it's like $1,000 of plastic damage. And the Super Tenere and adventure bikes, you get like some crash bars and you're good. You know, ultimately it's up to you, but to me, these bikes, these adventure bikes with the upright seating position that you can look very comfortably, are much safer. So they're much safer, they brake just as good as any other bike, they have ample power, and it just seems like you don't need much more than this when it comes to motorcycles. I think people are kind of fooling themselves thinking that you need an additional like 40 horsepower when it comes to riding on street roads, and you don't. It's so good to kind of like see very well out the mirrors. You know, on a sport bike you're constantly like adjusting your shoulder. The FJR, of course, is a little bit different when it comes to, come on, this guy. Oh, this guy was actually like letting me through. That's nice of him. Thanks. Yeah, it's beautiful out here. I also feel that a bike like this that's not as powerful as the FJR also keeps you from like losing your license. And the Fjr1300 that I had and the FJR, and one of the big reasons I sold the FJR is that it just kind of feels like you are going to lose your license. It is kind of like this fire-breathing monster. But this one, the engine on it feels very much like, almost like a tractor. It's powerful, it's torquey, and I think that the torquiness is really what makes it easy to ride. See, this is the problem with Maryland. So many driveways. No matter where you go into the countryside, there's all of these driveways. Now, one of the things that the Super Tenere definitely is not as good than the FJR is this: highways. Now, I'm not saying that the Super Tenere is terrible on the highway. It's actually extremely good, but everything is relative. And I remember actually exiting off of this ramp and merging onto this highway on the FJR, and I mean, you literally get sent back with the power that bike has. This one, it's a soft launch compared to the FJR. But when it comes to highway, because it is important for a lot of people, not so important for me. I think the only reason I take highways is that if I want to maybe beat the rain like I'm doing now, and to get to a place fast, or getting back from a ride, the highway is good. On the FJR, it's so planted, it's so heavy, it's so comfortable that you can really just go on the highway for very little, and it cruises at such high speeds. And I think that's one of the reasons I also don't like that, is because high speeds equals traffic tickets. Only you can determine the bike that is right for you. You know, if you like more of a sporty and powerful bike, the FJR is it. But if you like a upright, slower bike with more torque, the Super Tenere is right for you. But different budgets though. This one is a little bit more expensive. And on paper, you actually don't get as much. You know, less horsepower. I think it's less comfortable. But yet, I find this to be an almost perfect bike for the riding style that I have. And I just like the idea of like going anywhere. And for me, this is the bike that I would choose over the FJR. Alright, squids, thanks for watching. If you like what you see, make sure you hit that subscribe button and that like button. It really helps out and keeps me motivated. Alright guys, thanks for watching. I will see you in the next video.
To me, it look like a leprechaun to me. All you gotta do is look up in the tree. Who else in the leprechaun say yeah? Yeah!
This amateur sketch resembles what many of you say the leprechaun looks like.
Be a crackhead.
This wars off smells right here. This is a special leprechaun flute, which has been passed down from thousands of years ago from my great-great-grandfather who was Irish. I just came to help out.
I'm gonna run a backhoe and uproot that tree. I wanna know where to go.
To me, it look like a leprechaun to me. All you gotta do is look up in the tree. Who else in the leprechaun say yeah?
Kind of stuck here. The cops won't bother me.